Something is happening right now that should make every single American stop and pay attention, because this isn't just a Middle East story. This is a story about your money, your economy, and the institutions that hold the financial architecture of the United States together. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has issued a direct threat against financial institutions linked to the U.S. and Israel operating across the Gulf, and the response from Wall Street was immediate and visceral. Goldman Sachs told employees they must obtain approval before going to offices across the Middle East. Standard Chartered asked staff near the Dubai International Financial Center to leave. Major international companies, including Citi, Deloitte, and PwC, evacuated or closed offices in Dubai's financial district. These are not small players. These are the pillars of the global financial system. And they are physically emptying buildings because a sovereign military force named them as targets. Iran's state broadcaster listed Google, Microsoft, Palantir, IBM, NVIDIA, and Oracle as targets for retribution. American companies, American jobs, American technology infrastructure. 2 Iranian drones hit near Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest for international travel, wounding 4 people, while Iran has effectively blocked shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a key global oil shipping route that normally carries nearly 20% of the world's oil production. This is not a regional skirmish. This is a direct, calculated assault on the economic nervous system that connects America to the rest of the world. And it started on February 28th, and it is getting wider and more dangerous every single day. Let's go back to the beginning of all of this, because the beginning matters. It always does. On February 28th, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated surprise airstrikes on Iran. They killed Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. They struck military infrastructure across the country. And in doing so, they didn't just start a military conflict. They detonated a chain reaction that is still exploding right now in every direction imaginable. Iran responded with missile and drone strikes against Israel, U.S. bases, and U.S. allied countries across the entire region. And it has not stopped since. Not for a single day. Now, here is what you need to understand about the United Arab Emirates, because most Americans have a rough idea of Dubai, the gleaming towers, the indoor ski slopes, the luxury hotels, but they don't fully understand what Dubai actually represents in the architecture of global finance and global power. The UAE is not just a rich country. It is the connective tissue of the modern world economy. It has long positioned itself as the Gulf's safest bridge between East and West, a global hub for finance, logistics, aviation, and technology. About 90% of the nearly 11 million people who live there are expatriates from around the globe. It is, by any honest measure, one of the most internationalized economies on the planet, and Iran has been hammering it with missiles and drones every single day since this war started. Since the Iranian strikes began on February 28th, Iran has fired 285 ballistic missiles, launched over 1,500 drone attacks, and sent 15 cruise missiles toward the UAE alone. By March 13th, just the 13th day of the war. Read that again. In 13 days. That is not a warning shot. That is a sustained military campaign against a civilian nation whose only crime, in Iran's eyes, is hosting American military infrastructure. The UAE says it has intercepted over 90% of incoming missile and drone threats. As of March 12th, air defenses had intercepted 268 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, and 1,514 drones, with 6 fatalities and 131 injuries officially reported. 6 fatalities and 131 injuries sounds almost manageable until you realize those numbers exist only because the UAE's air defense system has been working at an extraordinary, almost superhuman level of effectiveness. And even that extraordinary system is being pushed to its absolute limit. Here is where it gets deeply, personally alarming for the American economy and for American workers. An Iranian military spokesperson announced that the country would begin targeting banks across the Middle East linked to the United States. That announcement landed like a bomb in boardrooms from New York to London. Iran's Joint Military Command made clear that this threat put at particular risk Dubai, which is home to many international financial institutions, as well as Saudi Arabia and the island kingdom of Bahrain. And the financial world didn't wait to see if Iran was bluffing. Goldman Sachs told employees they needed prior approval before going to any Middle East offices. Standard Chartered asked staff near the Dubai International Financial Center to leave. Citi, Deloitte, and PwC made moves to evacuate or close their Dubai offices. These aren't small regional outposts. These are the fundamental pillars of the global financial system, and they were physically emptying their buildings. And then look at the technology sector, because the implications there are staggering. Questions have been raised about the attractiveness of the region as a location for major technology investments after Iran targeted an Amazon data center in the UAE, disrupting cloud services. An Amazon data center. Just let that sink in for a moment. We are not talking about a military target in any traditional sense. We are talking about the cloud infrastructure that runs applications, that stores data, that powers businesses across entire continents. And it got hit. The smoke was real, the outage was real, the disruption was real. Now, Iran has publicly stated that it feels no hostility toward Gulf countries themselves. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian even issued what looked like an apology last weekend. He said publicly that Iran does not intend to invade other countries and called for setting aside disagreements to bring Iran out of the crisis with dignity. That sounded for a brief moment like a possible off-ramp. And then almost immediately after that statement was made, Iran fired rockets toward a U.S. airbase in the UAE. The apology also prompted a backlash from hardliners in Iran's Revolutionary Guards and clerical elite, with a hardline cleric publicly berating the president on social media, calling his stance unprofessional, weak, and unacceptable. So you have an Iranian president trying to thread a needle between diplomatic survival and internal political pressure from hardliners who want escalation, not negotiation. That internal contradiction inside Iran is itself one of the most dangerous variables in this entire situation. Iran's strategy, according to analysts, has aimed to create maximum discomfort for its immediate neighbors, to demonstrate that Tehran can shake the global economy and disrupt oil markets, and to pressure Gulf states into pushing the United States and Israel to end their aerial bombardment of Iran. In other words, Iran is not simply fighting back militarily. Iran is playing a pressure campaign, using the threat to global energy supply, global finance, and regional stability as a bargaining chip. And so far, that pressure campaign is having real and measurable effects. Iran's attacks and threats have nearly halted shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, sending petroleum prices soaring 40% and roiling the global economy. 40%. The price of oil has surged 40% in the span of 2 weeks because ships are afraid to transit through one of the most critical choke points on the entire planet. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz slowed to a standstill, with 150 freight ships, including many oil tankers, stalled. 150 ships, just sitting there, not moving, because the risk of being hit is too high. The current situation, alongside the fears of a declared blockade, has caused an increase in financial risk due to the impact on energy prices, shipping, insurance, aviation, and more. The war has provoked speculation in the world economy caused by the possibility of prolonged supply disruption, which will have broader consequences for inflation, currencies, and emerging markets. That last word, inflation, should make every American's ears perk up. Because we have been living with elevated prices for years now. We have watched interest rates rise to try to beat inflation back. We have watched families struggle with grocery bills and gas prices and housing costs. And now there is an active war half a world away that is directly threatening to spike global energy prices by another 40% or more. That is not an abstraction. That feeds into everything. Your gas tank, your heating bill, the price of every product that gets shipped across an ocean. President Trump responded to the Strait of Hormuz situation in classic Trump fashion. He said the U.S. had obliterated military sites on Karg Island, the main terminal handling Iran's oil exports. He also said oil infrastructure could be next if Tehran continues to interfere with ships' passage through the Strait of Hormuz, where vessels are backed up and 1/5 of global oil supplies usually transit. And he called on other nations, China, France, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, to send warships to keep the strait open and safe. Britain responded by saying it was discussing with allies a range of options to secure shipping. What Trump is essentially asking for is an international naval coalition to physically protect the world's most important oil corridor from Iranian attacks. That is an extraordinary ask, and it reflects how genuinely dangerous and destabilizing this situation has become. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council stepped in. The Security Council adopted a resolution in a 13-0 vote, with China and Russia abstaining, calling for Iran to halt its attacks on Gulf states. The UAE mission said the overwhelming support, reflected in what it described as the highest number of co-sponsorships in the Security Council's history, sends a clear message from the international community to Iran. But a UN resolution, however symbolically powerful, does not stop a ballistic missile in mid-flight. And Iran has shown no indication that the international community's disapproval is enough to change its military calculus. At least 11 countries have come under attack from Iran in retaliation for the ongoing U.S. and Israeli strikes. No country other than Israel has been hit harder than the Emirates. And here is what makes the UAE's situation particularly complicated and heartbreaking from a geopolitical perspective. The UAE has long prided itself on being a nation of tolerance. While many locals are deeply religious, they welcome foreigners with open arms. About 90% of the country's nearly 11 million residents are expats. Its reputation of being open, affluent, and socially flexible by regional standards is more progressive than many of its neighbors. It is, in many ways, a monument to what cosmopolitan, modernizing ambition can look like in the Arab world. And it is being systematically targeted precisely because of that openness, because of its ties to the West, because of the American bases it hosts on its soil. Multiple sources told CBS News that the White House was aware of America's Gulf allies running dangerously short on missile interceptors, forcing them to choose which incoming projectiles to shoot down and which ones to let through. Let that register. The UAE's air defense system, which has been performing at a remarkable level of effectiveness, is running low on the interceptors that make that effectiveness possible. And the United States, which helped design and supply that system, is now scrambling to resupply its ally fast enough. Gulf states were told that officials in Washington were creating a task force to get them new supplies, but sources said it wasn't happening as quickly as they needed. That gap between Washington's intentions and Washington's delivery speed is itself a crisis inside the crisis. Iran issued an evacuation warning for 3 major ports in the UAE, including Jebel Ali, the busiest port in the Middle East, openly threatening a neighboring country's non-U.S. assets for the very first time since the war began. This is a significant escalation in the rhetoric and in the declared scope of Iran's targeting. For 2 weeks, Iran maintained, publicly at least, that it was only targeting American military assets in the Gulf. Now it is openly threatening civilian ports, civilian economic infrastructure, the arteries through which goods and oil and commerce flow to the rest of the world. A senior UAE official told journalists at an official briefing that while relations between Gulf states and Iran are not gone forever, because at the end of the day you are neighbors, this has created a huge trust gap that, in that official's opinion, will last for decades to come. Decades. Not months, not years. Decades. The geopolitical architecture of the Middle East is being fundamentally and perhaps permanently redrawn right now, in real time, with missiles and drones and threats to bank buildings and shipping lanes. And the United States is not a spectator in this story. America lit the match. America is a combatant. The U.S. military has lost 13 personnel in this conflict already. American blood has been shed. American companies are evacuating their offices. American financial institutions are sending their employees home. American oil prices are going up. American allies are running out of the weapons we gave them to defend themselves. This is the world as it actually is right now. Not as we wish it were, not as we were told it would be, but as it is. A war that started 16 days ago has already reshaped global energy markets, threatened the international financial system, emptied office buildings in one of the world's wealthiest cities, and put American interests directly in the crosshairs of a sovereign military force that is angry, wounded, and still fighting. And the question that every single American should be asking out loud to their elected representatives, to anyone who will listen, is not just how we got here, but what on earth happens next.